All right. April 10th, 2025. It is 12:10 a.m. Right now we're going to go over the encampment management policy. Right? This is found on the City of Oakland's website under homelessness. You can Google um, Oakland cleanup schedule, and the cleanup schedule that we went over in the prior video will be on one side, and there will be another hyperlink to the encampment management policy. Today, we are quite literally going to go over this together, right? And I'm going to point out some inconsistencies. I'm going to point out some consistencies. I'm going to give some clarity on some things. Um, and, really just kind of walk you all through what this policy was intended for in relation to how it's actually being implemented. There's a huge lack of accountability when it comes to this. And I feel like it's important for the community to know um, that there is a plan in place. The city of Oakland has been demonized for this plan. Members of city council have been demonized for this plan because it hasn't been enacted. Um, I personally believe that if the policy was implemented the way that it's supposed to be, then it would be really good for everybody in the city of Oakland. Unfortunately, it's kind of one of those things where, right, like it has never been. It has quite literally never been implemented the way that it's supposed to. So let's give it a run, shall we? I have my coffee. This is my second take. So, I'm going to get a highlighter here, right, so we can highlight as we go. All right. So, first off, we should note this plan was enacted or voted on unanimously by City Council in 2020, right? This was something that was presented to City Council as a policy. City Council either approves or disapproves of it. Everybody voted on this plan. There wasn't a person that said, no, like, we don't want to see that happen. They agreed to this. City Council did, right? So keep that in mind as we're going over this. Okay? Now, the first thing you got to understand about the encampment management policy in the city of Oakland is that this was voted on unanimously in 2020. And what ended up happening is that they never put a budget behind it. They didn't put a budget behind it, which meant that there was nothing that was going to happen. You can't have a policy and enact it without having a budget behind it. You can't say we're going to have all these entities involved to help support this policy and not have the financial support behind it to show that you're doing that. So Resolution 8834-1, a resolution adopting the 2020 encampment management policy to be implemented by the administration upon adoption. Side note that the city of Oakland had to be sued because they never put a budget behind this. They unanimously passed this policy with no intention of ever implementing it. They got sued. There was a writ that was done that forced them to put a budget behind it. And because they put the budget behind it, they had to start making headway on implementing this policy. And the way that they have done it since has been absolute and utter shit. There is no accountability, no oversight. And what they are doing is more damage in our community than any good. So, let's get into it, shall we? Whereas the city of Oakland has experienced a 47% increase in its homeless population between 2017 and 2019, the majority of whom live in tents, makeshift structures, vehicles, and places not meant for human habitation. So, if the city of Oakland is trying to tell us that tents aren't meant for human habitation, right? So we got tents, right? Makeshift structures, vehicles. Tents are quite literally made for human habitation. There's no two ways about it, right? We camp in them, right? People live in tents long term. There are places in the country, in the state, where people have lived long term in tents, in vehicles, in makeshift structures, right? It's not really detailed what makeshift structures are not meant for human habitation. It's very vague, right? Just the opening of the encampment management policy is extremely vague, that if you don't know what you're looking for, you would think that this is pretty thorough, right? Or if you don't know any better. Whereas the number of tents and vehicle encampments tracked in Oakland currently exceeds 140, with over half of these encampments considered of significant size. Now, there is not $30 huge encampments in Oakland. There's not. There's just not, right? But there has never been, ever in the history of Oakland, there has never been 140 encampments. Now, to understand the way that encampment is defined for the city of Oakland, the city of Oakland, right, defines encampments as areas in which individuals are camping. Understandable, makes sense. But the way that they have tracked these metrics and numbers is to say, okay, well, somebody is sleeping on the grass at Lake Merritt, and maybe that person is homeless, right? And maybe that person is just sleeping there for right now, and in a couple hours they'll be gone. They deem that an encampment, right? When quite literally an encampment is a place where individuals live, right, regularly. They have made it their own. That is an encampment, right? Usually multiple individuals. To say with over half of these encampments considered of significant size is quite literally a fucking stretch. Over half of these considered of significant size. But once again, we don't have a detail as to what the significant size of this is. What is the significant size we're talking about? Are we talking about 3 or more individuals, 3 or more tents, 2 or more cars, 5 or more RVs? What is it we're talking about when we're talking about the sheer size of these encampments? Right? Like I said, there has never been, and there still isn't, 140 encampments in the city of Oakland. And mind you, this is supposed to be between 2017 and 2019. The numbers between these years for homeless in Oakland was about 2,600 to 3,000 individuals. Today in Oakland, there is more than 6,000 people homeless on the street, yet there is not 140 encampments. Keep in mind, while I'm talking about this, the inability of the city of Oakland to implement this policy as it's supposed to be implemented has resulted in more people being displaced from certain areas and other encampments popping up across Oakland. a way to track metrics and to say like we're helping people, but we still have a demand for monies because more people are ending up homeless on the streets in Oakland. Right? Let's move on. Whereas the adverse impacts of tents and vehicle encampments in Oakland continue to increase significantly, including a rise in service calls for fire, assaults, robbery, drug trafficking, right of way obstructions, storage of combustible materials, and illegal electrical wiring, all of which jeopardizes housed and unhoused residents' safety and health. True. There's no argument to that, right? The truth of the matter is that people that are out on the streets have to get electricity from somewhere. The storage of combustible materials are quite literally items that any household may have. So in my shed in the back right now, I have portable gas tanks. I have propane tanks. I have a barbecue grill that has propane. Right, I have gas cans that have gas in them in my shed. Right, different things that are combustible and they're stored in the shed. Now, is it realistic for us to say? And I need everybody to know that while this seems like I am trying to make an argument why homeless people shouldn't be bothered, that's not it at all. Right? What the purpose of this video or these videos are to do is to shine light on some issues that the community in general don't really discuss. Right? Policies that the community in general may not know. They may know exist, but don't know exactly the scale or what they detail they're supposed to do in these policies, right? And shine light on the fact that like they're not being implemented the way that they're supposed to, and how it affects the community in general. So the drug trafficking, yes, right? Dope boys and drug dealers see opportunity. If you're an opportunist and someone is living in an encampment, right, 9 times out of 10, they're probably going to be getting high. If you're dealing drugs, you're probably going to be able to make a pretty little penny, right, selling drugs in encampments. So it would benefit you for there to be encampments, right, as a drug dealer. Assaults happen quite literally in encampments, right, regularly, because when you throw a bunch of people together without any resources with mental health and substance use issues, right, like personalities are going to collide. So people are going to assault each other. Fires. Yes, there are going to be fires. And the reason why there are going to be fires is because quite literally, like some people are setting fires to stay warm. Others are doing it to cook their food. Some people fall asleep with a cigarette and their stuff ends up catching on fire. There have been countless occasions in Oakland where community members that don't like seeing encampments will go by and set people's stuff on fire. We have clients who have been burned out of multiple vehicles and RVs by people that are housed in Oakland that just want to see it gone. And because they don't want to wait or go through the correct channels, right, to file their complaints, they try to burn people alive in their vehicles. And if you think this isn't a fact, like, you can do your research. The robberies happen as well. What I want to shed light to is the right of way obstruction, right? A huge part of what's wrong in Oakland is the fact that there is so much illegal dumping in right of ways. If you would have the encampment management policy tell you right here, right, that a lot of this trash comes by way of people that are living in encampments, they're lying if you believe it. The unfortunate part of it is that dump fees are extremely high in Oakland, so it benefits the small mom and pop person who's running a business not to pay extremely high dump fees to go to waste management after maybe they just got paid $1,200 to clear out an apartment, and the load that they have is going to cost them $960 to dump at waste management. You're not making any money. And so naturally, because of the high price of this, individuals are opportunistic and they use these opportunities, right, to dump in these encampments. And the trash grows and grows and grows. And we think about a location like East 12th in the shanty town that is on East 12th, right? And quite literally, what everybody does there is recycle. People come and illegally dump over there. Those that live there take the items that they can use, repurpose them, build up on their houses, right? And the rest will stay in the street, obstructing traffic lanes. There's truth to this, but there's also deception. Does this affect the overall health and safety of the community? Yes. A lot of businesses have closed down. The property taxes have gone down. Tourism in different areas has gone down, but also like the ability for people to live in these areas, both housed and homeless, has completely diminished. People can't walk down the street, they can't drive down the street, and for as much as it's a burden on the housed community, it's also a burden on the unhoused community or the homeless, right? Because they're the ones that get blamed for everything. Maybe a conversation for another time. Whereas similar increases have been reported throughout the state of California, prompting the creation of statewide homelessness task force by Governor Gavin Newsom, and whereas the city of Oakland voters passed the 2020 Oakland Parks and Recreation Preservation, Litter Reduction and Homelessness Support Act, Measure Q, in March 2020 to support the maintenance of parks, water quality, and homelessness services. Whereas this encampment management policy is related to the second prong of the city's three-prong approach to addressing our homelessness crisis, which includes 1. Prevention, incorporating our Keep Oakland House program. 2. Crisis management response. And 3. Long-term housing for our unhoused residents. So let's talk about a couple of things. Measure Q is a conversation for another time because it's a whole nother thing, right? But litter reduction the responsibility of that falls on a department within the city of Oakland called illegal dumping. Now, I was speaking to a woman who's the CEO of a huge event that happens in Oakland that's very big for Oakland, and we were talking about solutions to the sheer amount of illegal dumping that we see in Oakland. And, she asked if there's a way to report people for illegal dumping and be rewarded. And I pointed out to her that there is a little something called Oakland, City of Oakland Illegal Dumping Department, right? And she was flabbergasted that this actually exists. She had no idea. All these years she's lived in Oakland, decades she's lived in Oakland, and she had no idea that there's a whole department in Oakland that gets millions of dollars a year that's purely dedicated, or supposed to be dedicated, to stopping the amount of illegal dumping and littering we see in Oakland, that are supposed to prosecute and hold people accountable for doing this. But it's not being done. We go down here and they start talking about prevention, incorporating our Keep Oakland House program. There's nothing that is currently being done, that is effectively being done, that is keeping people housed, let alone getting people long-term housing. There are programs in the city of Oakland that are getting millions of dollars from the city of Oakland every single year to conduct outreach and housing navigation that have quite literally barely housed anybody in the last decade or less. Yet the metrics that they are reporting are inconsistent with what is happening in reality, and because of which they continue to get funding. Crisis management and response, right? The city of Oakland implemented what is called macro, right? And macro is a program that is supposed to be responsive to people going through crisis in Oakland. Let's Google it real quick, shall we? So I think you're going to. So macro stands for Mobile Assistance Community Responders of Oakland, right? Macro program is an alternative response program in the Oakland Fire Department for non-emergency quality of life calls for service. Macro is completely useless. You got to keep in mind that this is an entity of the Oakland Fire Department. Oakland Fire Department, which means they are first responders. And if you ask anybody, they don't show up as first responders. Their training and the oath that they made to their job goes out the window when they show up to different things. Macro does not respond to crises. They don't. Because macro will tell you, and they have it in their guidelines and their policies, right, that like they don't respond to people that seem like they're mentally unstable, violent, aggressive. That to aid the dispatcher, callers should confirm that the situation is non-violent, non-emergent, with no visible weapons, and outside of a dwelling, residence, or business. Macro teams respond to calls about homelessness, some behavioral or mental health calls, and nonviolent community disturbances. Essentially, macro doesn't do shit. Crisis doesn't look like somebody just being on the sidewalk struggling. Usually, when we see crisis or mental health issues in Oakland, it requires a different level of response to somebody. We have had multiple occasions where people have needed first aid, and macro has claimed that they can't respond. Crisis management and response is bullshit. There's no real implementation. What they did was they took money and they put it into these different departments. They created a whole department within Oakland Fire for people to drive around and give out fucking water bottles. Water bottles, y'all. And 9 times out of 10, when macro is contacted, they always have a reason for why they cannot respond to a certain situation. They are good at talking people into saying that something is going on, right, that they can't respond to. Does the person seem agitated? Yes, the person seems agitated. Well, fuck, they seem agitated if they're going through crisis, right? Only naturally. But if you claim with macro that somebody is going through that someone is agitated, they will consider that like violent or something, and they won't respond. Just pointing out some of the facts here, right? The more you know. Whereas the city recognizes the need for varied interventions to address the need of unsheltered residents or those at risk of homelessness, including but not limited to shelter services, emergency beds, safe parking sites, hygiene services, prevention services, and employment services. Let's break this down real quick. starting with shelter services. For one, there is not enough shelters in Oakland. Usually when it comes to shelters, people know of 2 or 3 that are operating within the city of Oakland, and more than likely individuals don't want to go to these shelters because they have to deal with the same thing they have to deal with on the street in a more, you know, in a smaller environment. And they can't leave that easily. Some of these shelters have staff that are selling drugs to the clients, right? Raping the clients. Other clients in there that have their own issues that need a different level of care. And what you're doing is you're throwing a bunch of people in one space, right? Claiming that that's going to be helpful. You're not creating other safe space for people to go to, so nobody wants to go to shelters. I think in the last few years, St. Vincent de Paul Society of Oakland off of San Pablo in Oakland has only functioned at about 30 to 40% capacity, which means that 60% of their beds are open all the time because nobody wants to be there. But people will go and get meals. And if you ask people, right, 8 out of 10 individuals will tell you, I don't want to go to a shelter there because I don't feel safe. I don't have my privacy. I'm trying to stop getting high or stop drinking, and the staff are trying to push it upon me. We had one client who was being raped by one of the cooks at St. Vincent's, and when we tried to highlight it, we were demonized, but he was held accountable at the end of the day because he was taking young women that were going there either to volunteer or that were homeless. He was like serving them drugs without them knowing it. They were becoming addicted, and he was holding them hostage in his car, taking them away from St. Vincent's and raping them and beating them up. The horrors of what happens in some of these places is completely disgusting, and the way that it's allowed to happen is egregious. So is it a surprise that nobody wants to go into a shelter in Oakland when there's not that many of them? The city of Oakland didn't take this policy and say, okay, we have all this money in this budget, let's open up new safe shelter spaces. They have emergency beds, but emergency beds are in tiny homes. We'll get into that as we go further in this policy, right? But for shelter services, emergency beds, safe parking sites, right, there has to be space available, and there is not enough space in Oakland available for any of this. In the prior video that we posted about the Oakland cleanup schedule and the inconsistencies in that, what we end up seeing and being able to acknowledge is that, like, if there's 6,000 plus people homeless in Oakland right now, there's nowhere near enough services for all of those people. Yet the amount of closures that they're doing under the guise of the encampment management policy, right, is creating more wreckage than doing any good in our community. The city of Oakland keeps claiming that by enacting the encampment management policy by way of doing these closures, they're helping people, but nobody's getting shelter services, emergency beds, safe parking sites. Take into account the safe parking sites on Mandela in West Oakland. There's a safe parking site, right? That's for RVs. Multiple people have been killed. There have been multiple homicides, including security guards and clients that live there being killed inside of the fence. Do you think that people want to go to these places? The organizations that are overseeing them, that the city of Oakland is giving money and pumping money through to oversee these sites, is egregious in the way that they're implementing their policies. They're not enabling people to be better. They're enabling people to die. And we don't want to admit that we're in a place in the city of Oakland right now as a community where, like, people are being set up to just die. And we can't do anything about it. There's nothing in place, and there will never be anything in place unless we hold the city accountable, right, for their egregious acts. Employment services, it's just extremely laughable. It's laughable I can't think of one time the city of Oakland helped someone who was homeless on the streets, struggling, find a fucking job. Never, not once. I've also never met another nonprofit in the city of Oakland that has hired people that have prior been clients of theirs off the streets. So where are people getting jobs at? Urban Compassion Project is an organization that helps employ people as ambassadors. We have linkage services, relationships with different businesses and things like that, and different entities that hire people that are either transitioning, off the streets, or transitioning from prison, or whatever their case may be, right? Disabled, that help people with employment, job finding, and retention services, right? Things that people actually need to help them be successful. But there are organizations that have it in their plan that get contract money from the city of Oakland that say, well, you know what, like for the 60 people we have in beds here, we'll provide all of them with mental health, substance use, employment services, medical care, blah, 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 hygiene services, maybe safe parking, and they're not providing none of that. Really, all they're providing is some form of shelter that's decrepit. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about tiny homes. We're talking about Lake Merritt Lodge in Oakland by the lake, off of Grand, that was overseen by an organization called HCEB that had multiple clients dying inside their rooms. Consistently dying. Not doing room checks, not making sure that their facility was clean, right? And it got to a point where the landlord, the woman who owns the building, had to make a fuss so much so about it, and they got an eviction notice from her and they had to get out. Why? I mean, if I gotta tell you, then. And I myself, an Urban Compassion Project, cleaned out multiple rooms that were affected negatively and were there on multiple occasions when the coroner was out taking bodies. Have spoken to multiple people that we work with in the community that are homeless that didn't even want to be there because they said the organization that was running it didn't care about them. But they're supposed to be doing job readiness training, right? They're supposed to be providing hygiene services, prevention services. None of these things are being provided. And the reason why they're not is because there's no oversight. It's a look at this document that we created. Look how great it is. Let's do a couple of encampment closures, get a couple people into some tiny homes, maybe some safe parking, right? Set up a couple showers and porta potties across Oakland and call them hygiene services, right? And call it a day and say we're doing great when they're shit. Who are they, Vincent? We're talking about the city of Oakland here. Whereas the city recognizes the need for varied interventions to address the need of unsheltered residents or those at risk of homelessness, including but not limited to shelter services, blah, 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 blah. Whereas at the request of the city council, the city administrator undertook the development of a new encampment management policy in coordination with multiple city departments. Oh, this is where it gets good. Whereas a draft policy was presented to the Life Enrichment Committee on September 21st, 2020, and feedback from the committee members and public was received and considered, and whereas the city administrator has set forth in its entirety the policy that was developed in coordination with multiple city departments as the 2020 Encampment Management Policy in Exhibit A to this resolution, and whereas it is understood that staff will implement the 2020 Encampment Management Policy as written and shall not deviate from the principles set forth therein without returning to City Council, except that it is understood that during the current COVID-19 emergency, increased risk of exposure to the virus shall be a vital consideration as part of implementation of this policy. Yes, this was something that came about at the beginning of COVID. With the idea being that it can be something that they could say, oh, we passed this policy, but because it's COVID, nobody's out, nobody will see, nobody's really paying attention, nobody's being affected negatively except people on the streets, nobody's allowed out into the community, right? Like everything is shut down, shelter in place is real. We can get away with not implementing this correctly or putting a budget behind it. Resolved, the City Council adopts the proposed 2020 Encampment Management Policy (EMP) set forth in its entirety in Exhibit A to this resolution document, which outlines a comprehensive process to mitigate the adverse impacts of a tent and vehicle encampments on housed and unhoused residents, focusing encampment interventions on the mitigation of negative outcomes related to public safety and public health hazards, and be it therefore or further resolved. So when they're talking about this, what ends up happening is the encampment management policy will go on, and we'll see it here, to talk about high risk areas in relation to low risk areas. And high risk areas are where there's a lot of crime, there's, deaths and overdoses and different factors that's considered in what a high risk area is and how they're going to respond to high risk areas in relation to low risk areas. Low risk areas, and we'll get into all of this, low risk areas are supposed to get cleanup services and hygiene services and different things, whereas high risk areas are supposed to be closed. Let me be the first to say that none of the real high risk areas have been shut down. It's all bullshit. Whatever it is you're seeing on the City of Oakland's Instagram, or what they're reporting in Oakland side, or however they're getting the message out, right? Like, none of the work that's supposed to be being done is being done. If that was the case, people wouldn't be dying in our communities the way that they are. There wouldn't be unsolved homicides in Oakland, right? Completely different topic, but if we tried to find the metrics on how many people OD'd last year, died of overdoses from fentanyl or other drug-related overdoses, right, we wouldn't be able to find those. Because it doesn't benefit the city of Oakland to share this information while, they can say, oh, you know what, like somebody was killed on 23rd or Martin Luther King today. Like that's a homicide. But they never report like 4 people OD'd in the last 24 hours and died, right, from ODing. Another conversation for another time. Further resolve, the city administrator or their designee shall provide an implementation update to the council's Life Enrichment Committee within 4 months of council adoption, followed by semi-annual updates to the city council and the public by issuing informational memoranda that reports EMP outcomes and analysis. And be it further resolved that the Homeless Advisory Commission shall review the policy and implementation plan and provide recommendations to the Life Enrichment Committee within 4 months after council adoption and annually thereafter, and be it. So hold on a second. You mean to tell me now there's a whole committee around homelessness that's supposed to provide oversight to the implementation of the encampment management policy? Individuals appointed to this committee, they have town hall meetings where anybody is invited and you can discuss what's going on, right? It's a really good committee, the Homeless Advisory Committee or Commission, right? I will say that. But what are the metrics? These semi-annual updates, right, to the city council. Understand something. Understand something when we're talking about this, right? And public, right? So semi-annual updates to the city council and the public by issuing informational memoranda that reports EMP outcomes and analysis. If what we were seeing was true and these memos were going out informative as to the outcome and analysis, what we would see if they were reporting correctly is that what they're doing is conducting a bunch of fucking closures in the city of Oakland with nobody being serviced. They're literally creating more trauma in our communities, furthering people's mental health episodes and crisis, right? But coming back and claiming like we closed. I showed you all in the last video. If you haven't seen the last video, click on the last video right before this one about the cleanup schedule or the closure schedule. And I detailed in that video that there are so many closures happening with not enough space in Oakland that there is no way there should be any memorandum or report reporting that so many people have gotten services, because there's not that many services. But the city of Oakland will never post something or send out a memo that says, sorry, y'all, we're failing people. Gavin Newsom put out a notice not too long ago that like homelessness in Oakland had to be had to be like, or just in California in general, that cities and counties would need to tighten up on it. If not, he was going to stop sending counties or cities money for these issues. And instead of like moving towards good corrective action, what the city of Oakland did was try to pull the veil in front of our eyes again, right? And make it seem like they were doing something great, and they're not doing shit still. Something you got to understand about the city of Oakland is that the city is broke. And a lot of the money that they're getting from the state of California or from the Fed is literally coming by way of like money to help battle homelessness. Do you think that if that's all the money that they're getting, they're going to spend it all on homelessness? Probably not. Our last mayor, Shane Tower, who's facing 300 something fucking years in prison. I don't know what they said that was the maximum she could face for all of her fucking crimes of corruption, right? Was at last check. But the truth of the matter is she stole a bunch of money from the city of Oakland before she was ever mayor. And she got recalled, and you know what she did right before she got recalled? She signed an executive order for Public Works to go to no end to close down encampments. Essentially, fuck the encampment management policy, close down these encampments and clean up these streets, and they're not doing none of that. And it's easy to talk about this, and it's easy for other people to watch this and be like, oh yeah, that's bullshit. You don't know what you're talking about. When at the end of the day, like, you've never come out into the community, taken part in the cleanup, right? Have ever seen what Public Works does and how they just completely shit on all over our housed and unhoused community. They don't care. They're getting paid to do a job, and they don't care if people get help or not. True story, I can't make this up. Today we drove through East 12th, right? And there was a pile of trash that one of the unhoused or one of the homeless women there reported that the city of Oakland took from different parts on East 12th and literally brought it to that one area and just dumped it in the street. A pile of fucking trash right in front of people's homes. Blocking parking spaces and blocking traffic lanes. The city of Oakland did this. The city of Oakland's Public Works Department did this yesterday. But we got this whole plan here that is 12 pages that they're enacting. The inconsistencies, if you can't see them to this point, and we're only on page 2, which means we have 10 more pages to go to get a better understanding on this, and for it to start really detailing exactly what different roles are. This is very, very quite interesting. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to end this right here at page 2. And this will be in a couple different segments. We'll do these videos that are informative, right? Some of you guys will ask questions in the comments that will be answered later on as we go further into the encampment management policy and what it's supposed to be, what it meant to do in relation to how it's actually being implemented or how it's not being implemented. Still feel free to ask your questions. Still feel free to share your opinion. Do you think already, like hearing what we've gone over already in the EMP just in the first 2 pages, do you think that this sounds like a policy that, if implemented correctly, would actually help all of Oakland? Or do you think that it's a sham? Do you think that it's complete and utter bullshit and that there's no way that it can help Oakland? And if you feel that way, like, let us know why. We want to hear your opinion. We want to hear how people feel about this issue. We want to hear how you feel about just the overall state of Oakland right now. From the encampments to the trash to the parks being fenced up for nobody to be able to access, to different events like First Fridays being at risk of being taken out of Oakland, right? Sports teams leaving Oakland, Oakland not having any real revenue coming in. Share your opinion, share your thoughts here. We want to hear that, right? If you have a question that you hope to find some clarity on, drop your question in the comment, right? Let's have a conversation. This is all about, like, really at the end of the day, opening up discussion on how we can all get a better understanding, but also how we can all come to the table to find a way of being part of a solution. If you ask me, well, what is that solution? I don't know. I do know that a way that we're being part of the solution is by continuing to make sure that we show up for our homeless community, that we're cleaning up this trash that, per the encampment management policy, the city's supposed to be doing, but they're not. We're housing individuals that, per the encampment management policy, other people are supposed to be doing, but they're not. We're providing this crisis intervention to people that, per this, other entities are supposed to be providing, but they're not. That's our way of being part of some solution, and it's not everything. We can't help all 6,000 plus people in the city of Oakland that are struggling with homelessness, drug addiction, mental health, right, and other things. But we're making headway on helping those that we can, right? That's our way of being part of the solution. But like I said, drop your questions or your comments in the comments, right? Feel free to reach out to us. Tomorrow I will be doing another video, and we will go from page 2 to we will go from page 3 to page 4, right? So tune in for that one. That will be part 2 of the encampment management policy. Vincent from Urban Compassion Project here. Just trying to do some good old reporting at almost 1 o'clock in the morning here. Can't wait to hear you guys' thoughts, and stay tuned for the next one.